Tonight's video is going to be talking about ions. Now remember from the previous units, we've talked about ions in the past. And what is an ion? An ion is an element with a positive or a negative charge. Okay, so the first focus that will be on what happens to the size of something if it becomes positively charged. Well, when you think about what happens when it becomes positively charged, even not talking about the size, is it's formed by the loss of an electron. So you lose an electron, you become a positive charge. Why? When you lose something, you're positive because you're losing something that's negative, or the electron, which makes you more positive. These are, remember, called cations, or a positive ion, or something that's positive, like the cat for positive. So metals tend to lose those electrons. So you're talking about the things on the left-hand side of the periodic table. And we're going to focus on sodium. So sodium has one valence electron. Okay, and what's going to happen is it could either gain those 7 to make it have 8, or it could lose that 1. So it's going to lose that 1 valence electron. When it loses that 1, it becomes sodium with a +1, or Na with a plus, and it is known as a sodium ion. Okay, so whenever something is positive, you just say the element name and add the word ion next to it. So what do you notice? Well, you're losing it. What do you notice about the size? Well, you should notice that you lost this whole outer ring. So what happens is that it goes down in size. So the general trend is that if something becomes a positive charge, it becomes smaller in size. Why? Because you lost an electron. So for example, calcium is larger than calcium with a +2. Lithium is larger than lithium with a +1. So anything with a plus is going to be smaller than its atom, or the one without the charge. Why? Because think about, like, if you're losing weight, you're losing an electron, you're losing weight, it's going to get smaller in size, kind of thing, if you want to use that type of a logic. So you're losing it. Now, a lot of times we'll talk to you, I'll ask you, hey, what is potassium? We're going to compare potassium versus the potassium ion. When you're asked a question like this, what you need to do is you need to be able to think, okay, what is potassium? Well, potassium's K. Well, what would the ion be? The ion, remember, has that charge. So what you want to do is look on your periodic table and look at what potassium's charge is. In this case, potassium has that +1 charge on your periodic table that's shown to you. So it would be a positive, which means that potassium versus the potassium ion, the potassium would be larger. Why? Because as a potassium ion, it becomes smaller because it loses that 1 electron. Okay, negative charges. How do they get a negative? Well, it's the exact opposite as a positive. You gain an electron. So you're gaining something that's negative, therefore you are negative. It is called an anion, or a negative ion. And in this case, nonmetals tend to have negative charges. So when you look at the periodic table, they are to the right-hand side of the staircase. So when you're looking at it, what happens is like fluorine, for example, they tend to gain it. Why? Because they have that little opening space. They have, fluorine, for example, has 7 valence electrons, so it only has that one little spot. So it's going to want to gain 1 electron as opposed to losing all of the 7. So when it gains 1, it gets that negative charge. So when you want to think of names, it becomes a negative charge. And when you get a negative charge, the name, how you do it, is you say the first syllable of that element plus "ide" ion. Okay, so fluorine becomes fluoride ion. That's where we get that fluoride ion. So what happens to the size? Well, when you get a negative charge, think of gaining weight. So you're gaining an electron, it's going to get larger. And if you look at these examples, notice that every time you gained an electron, it became larger. So if I asked you, let's say, for example, chlorine versus the chlorine ion, or a charged chlorine, when I ask you which one is larger, what you want to do is figure out what chlorine is. So chlorine's symbol is Cl. Look on the periodic table. What's its charge typically when it's an ion? Cl has a -1. Because it has that minus, what that means is it gained an electron. So in this case, the chlorine ion is going to be larger. All right, so what you want to remember for these ions, negative charges, you're gaining an electron, you're getting larger. Positive, you're losing electrons, you're getting smaller. And then note on the periodic table, because we're going to be asking you which one's going to be larger, which one's going to be smaller. Note the ion versus the atom. Okay, so when I ask you for, let's say, sodium, you look at sodium. Sodium gets a +1 when it's an ion. So what did it do? It lost that electron, so the sodium ion would be smaller than that normal sodium one. All right, hopefully you have a basic understanding and have a great evening.